So as we're now at the point of the channel where we've got quite a few videos in quite a few categories coming on, I thought I'd put a compilation together. So here's the first of those videos. Here we have, for the Super Nintendo, the N.G.R reviews of Royal Rumble, of Super Star Wars, Sim City, Earthworm Jim, and F-Zero. Enjoy.
Back in 1993, the WWF was at its cartoony peak. They had stars such as Mr. Perfect, Kurt Hennig, Tatanka, the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, and Macho Man Randy Savage. And to play like that, if you wanted action that looked a little bit like this, then you needed to look no further than WWF Royal Rumble on the Super Nintendo. This was released on the 8th of June 1993, and it was a superior sequel to WWF Super WrestleMania that was released a year earlier. There are 4 modes in this game. There is 1-on-1, Tag Team, Triple Tag Team, and Royal Rumble. More on that a little later. They can all be played in either 1 or 2 player, and as a 1-fall exhibition match, a brawl, which is no rules, and as a tournament, except in the case of the 3-man tag. In this game there are 12 wrestlers playable from the get-go. There are Macho Man Randy Savage, Mr. Perfect, The Undertaker, Bret the Hitman Hart, Tatanka, there's Crush, we've got Ric Flair, we've got Shawn Michaels, Razor Ramon, Yokozuna, the narcissist Lex Luger, and the $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase. If you leave the controller for long enough on the character select screen, you get some 16-bit MIDI reworkings of the wrestlers' theme tunes. Here is Ric Flair's and then Crush's for an example. As the matches start, you will see they are very similar to Super WrestleMania from the year previous. The grapples are won by button mashing and winning the seesaw gauge at the top of the screen. The healthier your opponent, the harder it is to pull off those big moves. There's no commentary in the match as such, but you'll see you've got Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby the Brain Heenan sat in the back there, and the crowd get involved by stamping their feet if it's a bit of a boring match. The matches can spill to the outside as well, and you've got to the count of the referee's 10 to get back into the ring. There's the usual array of suplexes, body slams, atomic drops, backbreakers and jumps off the top ropes to be able to put your opponent down for that free count. When your opponent is outside and they're getting counted to 10, as usual in WWF, the referee could take a ref bump. This involves running against the referee and knocking him down for the count. Then when your opponent gets up off the mat, you can engage in some choking and some eye gouging, a bit like Hulk Hogan back in the 80s. Bobby the Brain always did say he was a bad one. Then when the energy's down far enough and you can get the bar all the way to the left hand side, using the right shoulder button, you can do the finishing manoeuvres, which gives you the opportunity to pin them. Then when you've got them down for the free count, the bell goes, the Fink comes into the ring and awards you the match. The second game mode on offer on WWF Royal Rumble is a triple tag team match. This can be 1 or 2 player, it could be 1 fall or 2 a brawl, and you select the difficulty and select your wrestlers. You get the card for the day coming up, so Razor Ramon, Yokozuna and the narcissist Lex Luger against Ted DiBiase, Macho Man and Mr. Perfect. In this mode it's much the same as a 1 player, the same ring applies, except your partner is on the left hand side or right hand side depending what player you are, and if your energy runs out you can go and tag them. As it's a triple threat match, you can change the character stood on the outside by using the select button on your console. As seen here, where Crush is changing into Ric Flair. All the same game mechanics apply. You can chuck them to the outside, but this time your friend comes down and helps you beat them to a pulp outside. Again, you've just got to beat the 10 count. Now there isn't a tournament mode in the triple tag team, so it's just a one-on-one, or you can beat your mate up as well. This is the brawl mode that we're playing now, so in essence you've got to get all the energy down, perform a move like that, and your opponent submits. The last one we're going to talk about here is the Royal Rumble, the 12-man over-the-top rope battle royal. Start off with 2 people and you've got to be the last man standing at the end. So we're going to fast forward some of these bits as you'll see in the recordings. The easiest way to chuck them out over the top rope is to perform a hip toss when your opponent is running back towards you. As you can see, the ring soon fills up, and as we rejoin the action, there's a maximum of six people in the ring. It can get a bit hectic, there's no rules, so you can choke and you can eye gouge as well. As you've seen the flashing green there above Ric Flair as you were attempting a suplex there, it means they're ready for their finishing manoeuvre, in this case the $1 Million Man's $1 Million Dream. Once you've done this, another way that you can chuck them out is by grappling with them and atomic dropping them out of the ring like that. So we'll fast forward now until the final couple. So we're down to the final 4 now, so there's Bret Hart and Macho Man Randy Savage, Razor Ramon and Ted DiBiase. So as you can see, the easiest way to chuck people out is over the top rope as they're running towards you. So as we come to the end of this second Royal Rumble I want to show you, we're down to Razor Ramon and Bret Hart. I just wanted to show you this for the another nice little feature you get in Royal Rumble. After you finish the Royal Rumble and you win it, you get this nice little ending screen. This ending screen, it shows you when you entered the Royal Rumble, how many people you threw out at what times, and it shows you from 2nd, 3rd, 4th all the way down to 12th, which I think is a nice little touch. So there was 2 versions of this game that was released. There was Royal Rumble for the SNES, but also Royal Rumble for the Mega Drive. Now these were released 3 months apart from each other, so there are slight differences in the roster. So whereas the Super Nintendo version has got Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna and Tatanka, the Mega Drive or Genesis version has got Hulk Hogan, IRS, Jim Duggan, the model Rick Martel and Papa Shango. Overall, the Super Nintendo version of Royal Rumble is one of my favourite games of all time. I remember opening this up on Christmas Day 1993 when my brother got Mortal Kombat, I got WWF Royal Rumble, and I was very, very happy with my choice, especially since the SNES version of Mortal Kombat didn't have any blood. Could it have been better? Could it have unlockables? Could it have a tournament mode? Yes, but for a young 13-year-old Phil, I was very happy. See you next time for the next noob review. Hello there, and seeing as this episode is due to release on May the 4th, what better day to go back and look at Super Nintendo's first outing in the Star Wars franchise. Today, we're going to be looking at Super Star Wars on the Super Nintendo. Back in 1977, Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, was released to the cinema going public. George Lucas had created a universe full of many famous characters, each more memorable than the last, with some notable exceptions. This franchise is widely regarded as the beginning of movie merchandising, with figures, lunchboxes and all manner of other Star Wars branded products, some stranger than others. It just made sense that computer games soon followed, and in 1978 Apple Computers created an unlicensed Star Wars game for its cassette-based Apple II computer. Interestingly enough, the first Star Wars licensed video game for home users was in 1982 with The Empire Strikes Back on the Atari 2600. And in 1983 Atari finally released the arcade version of Star Wars. It was a vector-based space shoot-'em-up, which was the first to feature digitised speech direct from a film. If you fast forward 10 years, and the 16-bit range of computers were emerging as a dominant format, and LucasArts produced and released Super Star Wars on the Super Nintendo, this game carrying on the insistence on putting the word Super in front of every game in the early days of the SNES. This game predated the sequel trilogy and even predated the remastered VHS versions of the first 3 movies, so the idea is to release these games to fill a gap for the Star Wars fans. So, on the 1st of November 1992, Super Star Wars was released in North America, with the European version some 5 months later in 1993. No such thing as simultaneous worldwide launches in these days. It was the only version of this in particular game, however Mega Drive 1 was in production, but more on that later. Upon loading the game, it won't surprise you that the sounds and feel of the game takes you straight into the Star Wars universe, from the game's title screen, although I'm not too sure about Luke's face, onto the opening section, and I'll let you take a look at this in its 16-bit glory. Once the introductions are out the way, the game is your typical run and gun game. Did I say typical? I meant bloody hard. Did I say bloody hard? I meant damn near impossible in places. Look, let's get this out the way early doors. This game is hard. Really hard. If it's not the baddies that get you, and in some of the later levels there are hundreds of them, it's the near pixel perfect jumps that you need to perform to complete the level. This here is a sample of level 3, and believe me, the controller almost got thrown across the room many a times. One mistake takes you all the way back to the beginning, either that or certain doom. And don't think just because you've killed the enemies once that's it. Oh no, they respawn. Thanks for that, Darth. You do have a number of different attacks to help you on your way. You can shoot your laser, or a little bit later in the game you collect your lightsaber. Now your lightsaber is the most powerful weapon in the game, but you do have to be very close to your opponents to use it. This does make it kind of redundant, as 80% of the enemies just shoot you before you get close enough to use it. Your laser can be upgraded and it gets more powerful as you go on, but you die, it's right back to the basic model. Your character can run and jump, which you would expect in a runny jumpy shooter game, and they can perform a higher somersault jump. Oh, and they can do a skid. Also, pressing the left and right shoulder buttons gives the ability to look up and down, and you will use this for some of the more tricky jumps later on in the game. To break up the gameplay slightly, there are a number of different driving levels which see you enter the cockpit of one of the land speeders. Here, you have to shoot a number of predefined enemies and then speed off to the goal. These levels make fantastic use of the SNES Mode 7 ability and showcase the console to its very best. The graphics are great and what you'd expect from a 16-bit Super Nintendo game of the time. You can clearly see the different enemies and the character you control, and a little bit later on you collect Chewbacca and Han Solo as controllable characters. These both have their own unique style and abilities, or you could input one of the many cheat codes and have these 3 characters available from the very beginning. It's your choice. There are 15 levels in the game and they do loosely follow the plot of the film. And it's not exact, but hey, if George Lucas wants to have some artistic license over his franchise, who am I to complain? Except we can complain about him, because he was rubbish. Each level gets more and more difficult and you will need all these continues and lives to get through it. Most of the levels do have an end of level baddie, but again not many of these are from the film, but when you're George Lucas you can do what you want. Even going as far as borrowing some designs from other franchises. See if you can spot what this end of level baddie is influenced by.
Please put down your weapon. You have 20 seconds to comply.
When you get to the end you become Red 5 fighter and you go and kill the TIE fighters on the Death Star. Then you enter a sequence which is very much like the Vector game from the early 80s, shooting fireballs and killing Darth Vader's ship. Then you've got to pinpoint fire your laser into the exhaust hole to blow the Death Star. Phew, bet that's the last we'll see the baddies for a while. They definitely won't milk this for a further 8 films. Then you are greeted to a rendition of the closing scene from the Star Wars film, and given this is early in the Super Nintendo's life cycle, it's very well done. The music is faithful to the original and the graphics are fine. You are then greeted to a question, and the question is, will the Empire strike back? Well, I wonder. Super Star Wars has only ever seen the light of day on the Super Nintendo, but there was a Mega Drive version like I mentioned earlier. It was in the process of being made and it was far down the production cycle when it was canned. The ROM did appear on various sites earlier this year, but it's by no means a completed game, but it's well worth a look if you can find it. It was to be expected really, but Super Star Wars spawned 2 sequels, Super Empire Strikes Back and Super Return of the Jedi, again with the Super. And this game still remains a great game, so if you want a challenge, you've got a few hours to kill, and you've got access to a Game Genie, and you need one of them, go and save the universe from the Imperial forces. Oh, and try not to get your home planet blown up in the process. So that's all from this episode of New Game Reviews. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you next time, and may the Force be with you. God, I can't believe I just done that. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 30 years, you will have heard of the Sim franchise. It's a collection of games that lets you simulate the real world, culminating in the latest Sim series of games. This was a brainchild in the late 80s, and then a computer game designer by the name of Will Wright created a game called Raid on Bungling Bay, in which you controlled a helicopter and set off rescuing a city. One element of the game was the city creator, which interested Will, and the idea for Micropolis was born. This game was later renamed to SimCity so not to attract any naming right lawsuits from a computer company over in the USA. The publishing company Maxis, which was the brainchild of William, in 1989 released SimCity for the public, first for the Amiga and the Apple Macintosh, and the PC and the Commodore 64 later in the year. The version we will be looking at today was released as a launch title for the Super Nintendo. So, today, Noob Game Reviews will be looking at SimCity on the Super Nintendo. Released alongside the console on the 26th of April 1991 in Japan, August 91 in America, and over a year later in Europe on September the 24th 1992, SimCity was an instant success. It remains faithful to the original source game, and as we discover, had its own little Nintendo-esque tweaks as well. The game starts with an option to practice, start a new city or complete a scenario. If you have a previously saved city, you do get the option to start that up again as well. Selecting Start a New City gives you the option to choose one of 1000 predefined maps. These don't change, so if you like the look of one, remember the number. Once you select the map type, you can choose your starting difficulty. The harder the level, the less money you have to start with, and the more likely things are to go wrong, but more on this later. Then you were given the map, a nice clean canvas for you to mark on the world and write your name in history. Or you could cock it up, it's one of the two. The screen is divided into 4 sections: the main map screen, which is the big map right in the middle, the construction pane on your left, the options bar in the top left, and your status bar in the top right. The status bar shows the current population, how much money is in the city's kitty, and what type of zones your cities need. There is a bit of a lag in this however, so be careful. The construction tiles are where you choose what you want to build. Now the majority of what you build are zones, either residential, the red places for people to live, commercial, these are blue tiles for people to shop, or industrial, and these are yellow for people to work. Alongside these you need to build power lines to a power station, then once completed your city will start to grow. There are other tiles such as police and fire stations, sports stadiums, airports and other various special tiles that are awarded to you at certain times, such as your own house. Do you want to live near the plebs? Or do you want your own little mansion in the country somewhere? These all have their own individual benefits, such as fetching more income into your city or encouraging industry to thrive. Your city needs ways for your citizens to get around, and this is where your roads come in. These can get quite busy and add to your pollution levels, and this in turn leads to your citizens' unhappiness. One of the top tips from me is to start with the rail option from the get-go. Yes, it costs more, but it will pay for itself in the long run. Along the top left is your options bar. This gives you all the information you need to see how well a job you're doing. The map icon lets you know information like land value, crime rates, police coverage, etc. All information you will need to plan out your city. The tax icon lets you set the tax value. This gives you income once a year for you to build. A quick game this isn't, but you get out what you put in. If you're feeling that way inclined, you could unleash disasters on your city, although they do come randomly throughout the game if you want. There are 6 you can choose from. You can have a fire or a flood, a tornado or an air disaster, you can have a monster attack, or you can have a nuclear power plant disaster. All fun ways to test your citizens. You do deal with them all in different ways. Here you see in the SNES version, the monster attack is by our old friend Bowser. Where's Mario when you need him? You are aided by Dr. Wright, the namesake of the game's creator. He gives you hints and tips along the way. He also alerts you to disasters, and he gives you hints and tips with how to deal with this. For a strategy game, the graphics are rather good. The animations and little bits of detail are excellent, and every time you look at your tiles you will see something different. This was a great launch title for the Super Nintendo. The music is catchy, however I do prefer to play the actual game with the music turned off. Just my personal preference. The scenarios section gives you different disasters or town planning issues to deal with. They all have a yearly base time limit, and they are good fun if you tire of the main game. Here is one of the introduction sequences to one of them sections. I wanted to cover this game as it was one of the first games I bought with my own money. I bought it second hand in a game shop in the local market back in the day. Played this for hours and still like the odd blast here and there. If you have an addictive personality and you have a bit of a time on your hands, and at the moment I think most people do have time on their hands, you could do a lot worse than this game. That's all for this episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Noob Game Reviews.
In 1994, we had already had a lot of cartoon mascots trying to make a name for themselves. We had the obvious heroes like Sonic and Mario, but there was also the likes of Zool, Bubsby the Bobcat, and even James Pond. But there was one hero about to launch on outer screens in a very memorable computer game, that not only spawned a series of great games, but also the very own cartoon series. Today, Noob Games Reviews looks at Earthworm Jim on the Super Nintendo. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles franchise gave a lot of publishers some ideas, and Playmates Toys wanted a computer game that they could latch onto and put in the market to copy the Turtles' success. Doug Temple sketched a draft copy of Earthworm Jim and presented it to Shiny Entertainment. Impressed, they snapped up the rights and development started. The producers had previous knowledge of the platform genre, with Cool Spot already being released, and Earthworm Jim satired these games. An example of this is a damsel in distress being named Princess What's-Her-Name in reference to the lazy plot of most platformers at the time. The game was released in October 1994. It uses a 2D platform mechanic. Jim can shoot, jump, and whip his own head around in various levels to defeat some strange and wacky enemies. Some take a quick shot, but some need whipping with his head. The plot is that Jim's suit fell on him while being stolen by Professor Monkey for a head, which gave him magical powers, and it's Jim's job to rescue the princess. Everything in this game is out to get you, and yep, I do mean everything. If it's not the swooping enemies, it's the spikes or it's the gaps in the platforms. And be warned, when you enter this game, it's not easy, and it will take great skill and memory to complete. The levels are long, and expect to spend a good 10-15 minutes on some levels. The platform mechanics are unforgiving here, with some leaps and gliding needed to advance. I mean, Jim can use his head to hover and swing in certain points of the games. I mean, what else is a superhero earthworm to do? There are some variations in gameplay. There are some racing levels where it's Jim's task to beat his opponent to the end of the level. And in other levels, for example this one, For Pete's Sake, it involves Jim whipping a puppy across the level, avoiding baddies and pits. If the puppy doesn't avoid these enemies, he attacks him, and it knocks Jim further back in the level to try and complete it. The graphics are fantastic, with animation that looks hand-drawn. It's smooth and full of character. The music is also good, with different music at different levels, with funny sound effects and catchphrases for Jim. As I mentioned earlier, the publishers wanted to create a franchise, so in 1995, Earthworm Jim the cartoon was released with one of the best theme tunes ever. Take a listen.
Despite his great big muscles and his really big ray gun, Jim is still an earthworm, but then he's the only one with a super suit to make him really super strong. Jim can be a winner if we only sing along. Earthworm Jim,
We think he's mighty fine.
Earthworm Jim,
A hero for all time.
Earthworm Jim. Hooray for Jim! Groovy!
The cartoon ran for 2 series and carried on the comedy and feel of the game. Dan Castellaneta from The Simpsons voiced Jim in the cartoon. The game was ported to the Sega Mega Drive and also released for the new generation of consoles through their on-demand services. However, I firmly believe that Earthworm Jim and its sequel is one of the best games on the system. The graphics, the music and going hand in hand with the cartoon makes this game very memorable indeed. In fact, I adore this game so much, I've even got a tattoo of him on my leg. As I said, there was a couple of sequels, Earthworm Jim 2, Earthworm Jim 3D and Earthworm Jim Menace to the Galaxy. However, the final game didn't review too well, so this put a nail in the coffin of the series. Overall, the original game holds up very well. Indeed, Sega decided to put it on a title on the Sega Mega Drive mini console that was released in 2019. I still play this original game to this day. Most gamers will be aware of Earthworm Jim, but if you haven't played it, give it a try. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Noob Game Reviews. One of the best parts of making these videos is that I get to go back and revisit games that I used to play years ago. I take a look at them and see if rose-tinted glasses are in play, or if they really do stand the test of time. Today is one I used to play for ages when I first got my Super Nintendo, so let's see if it's as good as I remember. Today's review is F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. Released as a launch title on the Super Nintendo, F-Zero was released in Europe in 1992. The game takes place in the year 2560, where we no longer watch Formula 1 and instead the racing is conducted using hover vehicles in the F-Zero League. There are 4 playable characters and each have their own characteristics. You pick one and off you go. The 4 characters are named in the instruction manual as Captain Falcon, Dr. Stewart, Pico and Samurai Gura. You also got an 8-page comic with the game to give Captain Falcon a backstory. He's definitely the breakout hero in this game. The game contains 15 tracks and these are divided into 3 leagues, with King being the most difficult one, and there's also 3 difficulties to start with. This is a 1-player game and you race against the computer-controlled opponents, and all the cars except for the main 4 ones are identical. I call them cars, obviously they are hover vehicles of some description. The race starts and it is your objective to complete the 5 levels in a higher position as possible. The top of the screen tells you your current position, and there is another number there. You need to finish the current lap either at that position or above, or it's race over. You can also see there you've got a power gauge. This decreases as you bash into the edges of the track or other cars or even mines that are placed on the track. If this empties, you blow up and again it's game over. You can replenish this by running over the pit lane every lap. There are various obstacles, mines and rough terrain that slows you down, as well as ramps that if you don't hit them just right, you fly off the screen. And there's no respawns here, it's straight to game over, you lose a life and you can choose to continue or end the game. You do start off with 2 lives and you can gain extra lives every 10,000 points. You gain a super boost at the beginning of every lap and this gives you a speed boost. Best use these on the straights or it does get mighty hard to control. Speaking of the controls, they're simple enough. The B button accelerates, Y brakes, A uses the speed boost, L and R strafes the vehicle and helps with those tight turns. Well, as you can tell, there's no turtles or mushrooms to give you a boost. This is a pure out and out racing game. The music's fantastic and memorable, and the game is fast and slick. However, there's not much here to do once you've seen all the tracks. There's no bonus tracks, there's no leagues, there's no competition. The only extra thing is a harder difficulty level once you've completed the king level. There's only one player game, which doesn't help the longevity of it. It's a very basic racing game once you've looked past the graphics and sounds. The Mode 7 is very well executed here, and if I was a cynic, I would say this game, along with Pilot Wings, was released to showcase the console's capabilities rather than be a game with any replay value. But I'd only say that if I was a cynic, you understand. The game's got a few sequels, and it was part of the 2017 Super Nintendo mini lineup, and being a launch title, it's to be expected really. Upon replaying the game, it didn't hold me like it used to. Yep, it's fast. Yep, it's one of those games that you should all play, but personally I think purely for nostalgic reasons. Games magazines at the time gave it rave reviews, and you can see why, but some 30 years later, nah, not for me I'm afraid. Thanks for watching this episode. Do you agree with what I've said? Either way, leave some comments below, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Noob Game Reviews.